Look, there's more. Jake piped up, his youthful curiosity momentarily overshadowing his trepidation. It says they were reported missing after strange noises were heard coming from their house. The neighbors thought it was just their dog barking, but what? I interrupted, my tone sharper than I intended. What else does it say? They had a dog too, he replied, glancing nervously at Max, who lay quietly by my feet. The dog's ears perked up at the mention of his fellow canine, as if sensing the connection. Let's just focus on what we have here, Sarah said, trying to steer the conversation back to the articles. There's something about a symbol, a mark they found in the basement. I clenched my jaw, the weight of her words settling heavily in the air. We need to get back home and see if we can find that symbol, I said, determination creeping into my voice despite the dread pooling in the pit of my stomach. The drive back felt longer than it should have, the quietness of the car amplifying the tension among us. I glanced at Sarah, who stared blankly out the window, lost in thought. Jake and Lily were unusually silent in the back seat, their expressions mirroring the unease that filled the air. Once we arrived, the house loomed over us, its shadow stretching ominously as the sun began to set. I led the way inside, the familiar creaks of the floorboards beneath my feet sounding louder than before. Max, stay close, I instructed, but the dog seemed restless, sniffing the air and pacing back and forth. Dad, I don't want to go to the basement, Lily muttered, her voice trembling. I knelt down beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I know, sweetheart, but we need to face this together. We'll figure it out, I promise. As we descended the stairs, the air grew colder, and I could feel an unsettling weight pressing down on us. Flickering light bulbs cast eerie shadows that danced along the walls. I reached for the switch, and the basement erupted into artificial light, revealing cluttered boxes and old furniture covered in dust. Where do you think the symbol is? Jake asked, glancing around nervously. Let's start with the walls, I suggested, moving closer to a section that appeared to have been painted over multiple times. As I ran my fingers along the surface, I felt a strange indentation, like a carving hidden beneath the layers of paint. Guys, over here, Sarah called from a corner. I hurried over to find her kneeling beside a box that had been pushed aside. Inside, we discovered old photographs and what looked like a torn diary. This might belong to the previous family, she said, excitement mixing with fear in her voice. Let's read it, I urged, but as I reached for the diary, a loud crash echoed from the far end of the basement, causing us all to jump. Max barked frantically, his growls resonating in the silence that followed. What was that? Jake whispered, his face pale. I don't know, I replied, my heart racing. But we need to check it out. With trepidation, we made our way toward the sound. But as we reached the source, the space seemed to grow heavier, the air thick with an unshakable dread. Max, stop it, I shouted. But the dog was fixated on a dark corner, barking furiously as if he sensed something we could not. What's wrong with him? He's scared, Dad, Lily said, clutching my arm tightly. Maybe we should just go back upstairs, Sarah suggested, her voice trembling. No, I replied, though my own resolve was wavering. We can't let fear control us. We need to understand what's happening here. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The shadows around us were shifting, and whatever presence lingered in this house was growing ever closer, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. As we descended into the basement, a feeling of unease settled over me. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of mildew, giving it a musty quality that made me want to cough. Max, our dog, hung back, his ears perked up and his body tense, as if he sensed something I couldn't. Come on, buddy, it's just a storage area, I coaxed, though my voice felt hollow in the dim light. Why is it so dark down here? Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I glanced back at her, noticing how her small hand clutched Jake's tightly. "Let's turn on the light," Sarah suggested, flicking the switch. A feeble bulb flickered to life, casting long shadows that danced on the walls. The basement was cluttered with old furniture covered in sheets, boxes stacked haphazardly, and an assortment of forgotten relics. As we ventured further inside, I spotted a door at the far end, slightly ajar. "Hey, look at that." I pointed towards the door. "I wonder what's behind it." As we approached, the air grew heavier, and I felt a chill creep up my spine. I pushed the door open, revealing a small room filled with old belongings. The walls were lined with photographs of a family long gone, smiling faces frozen in time, their eyes now seeming to watch us. I could feel Sarah's presence behind me, and when I turned to look at her, I saw her shiver. "This is creepy," Jake murmured, glancing at a torn diary lying open on a dusty table. Its pages were yellowed and brittle. "Let's see what it says," I urged, picking it up carefully. The handwriting was shaky, as if penned in haste. "The darkness creeps in at night, whispering secrets I cannot understand. I feel it watching me, lurking in the shadows." As I stepped out of the car, the crisp air filled my lungs, invigorating me with a sense of hope and excitement. "This is it, our new beginning," I said, turning to Sarah and the kids, who were eagerly taking in our new surroundings. The Johnson family was about to embark on a fresh chapter in a charming, albeit quiet, neighborhood. The house stood before us, a spacious two-story structure with a classic design and a front porch that beckoned for lazy summer afternoons. Yet, despite its inviting appearance, there was an almost palpable stillness in the air, a feeling that made me pause for a moment. I shook it off, chalking it up to the novelty of the move. "What do you think, kids?" I asked, glancing at Lily and Jake as they jumped out of the back seat, their eyes wide with wonder. "Can we explore now, Dad?" Lily chirped, her curly hair bouncing as she bounded toward the front door. Jake, always the cautious one, hung back slightly, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. I watched him for a moment, a flicker of concern crossing my mind. "Hey buddy, you okay?" I asked, kneeling to his level. "Yeah, it feels weird here," he replied, his forehead wrinkling with uncertainty. I ruffled his hair and smiled reassuringly. "Just give it a little time. You'll love it." As we ventured inside, the atmosphere shifted. The hardwood floors creaked beneath our feet, and the scent of musty air filled my nostrils. The living room was spacious, with large windows that allowed the golden sunlight to spill in. Yet there was a strange chill that lingered in the corners. "What a great space for movie nights," I exclaimed, trying to keep the mood light. "Can we pick our rooms?" Jake asked, his earlier hesitation fading as he explored a little further. "Of course. Let's find the best ones." Sarah chimed in, her enthusiasm contagious. We split up to wander through the house, each family member's laughter echoing off the walls. I felt a warmth spread through me, grateful for this new adventure. It wasn't long before we gathered back in the living room, ready to share our findings. But just as I began to speak, Max, our loyal golden retriever, suddenly froze, ears perked, and let out a low growl. "What's wrong with him?" Sarah asked, glancing toward the corner where Max was fixated. "He's just adjusting," I said, trying to reassure her. "Dogs can sense things we can't." But deep down, I felt a shiver run down my spine as Max continued to bark, eyes locked on the darkened corner of the room. "Max, come here," I called, but he remained stubbornly rooted in place, his growl intensifying. "Maybe he just sees a shadow," I suggested, brushing off the unease that was creeping into my thoughts. "Let's not worry about it. We got plenty to unpack." That night, as we settled into our new home, I tried to shake off the strange occurrences of the day. The kids were tucked into bed, and Sarah and I were enjoying a rare moment of quiet together. Just as I reached for the remote, An unsettling noise broke the silence. A faint creaking sound echoed through the hall. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I frowned, listening intently. "It's just an old house," I replied, attempting to sound more confident than I felt. But just as I said it, a door slammed shut somewhere in the house. My heart raced. "Okay, that was definitely not the wind," Sarah said, her eyes wide with concern. I stood up, attempting to appear brave. "I'll check it out," I said, hoping to quell our growing anxiety. As I walked toward the hallway, I could feel Sarah's eyes following me, a mix of fear and worry evident on her face. When I reached the living room, I noticed Max again, barking furiously at that same dark corner. "Max, enough," I commanded, but he continued, as if he were trying to warn us about something unseen. I felt an unsettling chill settle over me, and I instinctively glanced around, half expecting to see a figure lurking in the shadows. "Mark," Sarah called from the hallway, her voice trembling slightly. "What's going on?" "I don't know," I admitted, my heart pounding in my chest. "Just stay close, okay?" I felt a wave of dread wash over me as I turned back to the corner, where the darkness seemed to thicken, almost pulsating with a life of its own. As I stood there, my mind raced, trying to rationalize the strange happenings. But deep down, a seed of fear was planted. We had only just arrived, and already, the house was revealing an unsettling presence, one that hinted at secrets waiting to be uncovered. Little did we know that our quest for a peaceful life was about to plunge us into a mystery far darker than we could have ever imagined. As I sat at the small wooden table in the dimly lit corner of the local library, the musty smell of old books surrounded me. I rifled through the stack of newspaper clippings that Lily had brought over, my heart racing with each word I read. "Vanished without a trace," the headline screamed. My mind struggled to absorb the chilling reality that the previous family, who lived in our new home, had simply disappeared. "Mark, look at this," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper as she unfolded a brittle piece of paper. She pointed to an article dated over 20 years ago. "It says here that the family was last seen at a community event, and then nothing." I could see the fear in her eyes reflecting my own. "Maybe they just moved away, Sarah. We can't jump to conclusions." I tried to rationalize, but deep down, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Furniture flew, the walls shuddered, and I felt a force pulling at me, trying to separate us. "Stay together," I yelled again, but the shadows were relentless. "Daddy!" Jake screamed, and I felt a surge of panic. I glanced back at him, his wide eyes filled with terror, and my heart broke. Just as the energy in the room peaked, I caught a glimpse of something horrifying in the shadows. A fleeting image, a memory that felt like my own but was obscured by the darkness. A face, twisted and desperate, flickered in and out of view. "What are you?" I breathed, the question slipping out before I could stop myself. The entity's voice echoed, low and menacing. "You know me, Mark. You've always known." A chill ran down my spine as realization dawned on me. The connection between us was deeper than I had anticipated. The words escaped my lips before I could think. "What do you want from us?" The shadows surged forward, and I braced myself, my family clinging to me as the room erupted in a cacophony of sound and fury. We were teetering on the brink of annihilation, and I could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on me, threatening to consume us all. As we stood in the living room, the atmosphere was charged with an electric tension that made my hair stand on end. I could feel the presence of the entity looming over us, its dark energy palpable. "We have to do this," I urged, my voice trembling with fear and determination. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with dread, while Jake and Lily clung to each other, their small faces reflecting the terror we all felt. "Max, come here," I called out to our dog, who was barking furiously at the dark corner once again, as if he could sense the malevolence lurking there. The room was dim, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. It felt as if the house itself was alive, breathing with a sinister intent. As we began to chant the counter-ritual that Mrs. Hargrove had provided, the air thickened around us. By the power of the light, we bind you, we recited in unison. My heart raced as I felt the surge of energy coursing through our voices. But just as I thought we might prevail, the shadows coalesced, forming a dark figure that writhed and twisted before us. "No, you can't take us," Sarah screamed, stepping protectively in front of the kids. The entity lunged forward, and I felt an icy grip close around my heart. "Mark," Sarah shouted, her voice filled with desperation. "We need to keep going." I focused on the symbol we had found in the basement, the binding mark etched into the walls. "It's tied to the ritual," I remembered, but before I could say more, a flash of intense memories surged through my mind. Images of a family gathered in this very room, performing a dark ceremony. And then it hit me like a freight train. I was connected to this darkness. I was a descendant of that family. "Sarah, wait," I gasped, the truth crashing over me like a tidal wave. "I'm linked to this. I'm part of it." A look of horror spread across her face. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I think I'm one of them. They performed a ritual, and it went wrong. That's why we're here. It's been waiting for me." I felt the entity drawing closer, its presence suffocating. The shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own, reaching out toward me, beckoning me to join them. "Don't let it take you," Jake cried out, his small voice breaking. Lily buried her face in her brother's shoulder, and I could see their fear mirrored in Sarah's eyes. "We can fight this, Mark. You're stronger than this. By the power of the light, we bind you." We chanted again, but the words felt feeble against the force that was bearing down on us. The entity shrieked, a sound that pierced through the air like glass shattering, and suddenly everything went dark. In that moment, I was pulled forward, my body moving against my will. "Mark!" Sarah screamed, but I could barely hear her over the roar of the shadows. I felt myself being dragged toward the dark corner, the very place where Max had barked with such intensity. "No, no!" I shouted, panic surging through me as I fought against the invisible chains that bound me. Then, in an instant, the world shifted. I was enveloped in darkness, surrounded by whispers that echoed through my mind. Memories flooded my thoughts, laughter, a family torn apart, and a ritual gone awry. "You belong to us," a voice hissed, cold and mocking. "You cannot escape your fate." And just as abruptly as it began, the shadows pulled me into their depths, and I was lost to my family's cries. "Mark, come back." I could hear Sarah's voice, but it was fading, echoing in the distance as I was consumed by the darkness. As the house settled back into an unsettling silence, I could feel the weight of the entity's presence lingering in the air. A final whisper slithered through the darkness, chilling me to the bone. "This battle is far from over." The last thing I heard was the sound of my family's screams, a haunting reminder that we were not just victims of a malevolent force, but unwilling players in a sinister game that had been set in motion long before we had arrived. Gather items that belonged to the previous family, along with any personal belongings of yours that carry strong emotional ties. "We'll need them for the ritual," Mrs. Hargrove instructed, her voice firm but gentle. As we prepared, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stepping into a dark abyss. I found myself in the basement again, surrounded by the remnants of a life that once was. Torn diaries and faded photographs littered the space, each item whispering secrets of a family that had vanished. My hands trembled as I picked up a small, cracked mirror, its surface dulled by time. "Mark!" Sarah's voice called from upstairs, breaking my trance. The kids are getting restless. I took a deep breath and climbed back up the stairs, the weight of the situation settling heavily on my chest. When I entered the living room, I found Lily and Jake sitting on the floor, their expressions mirroring the tension in the air. "Are we going to be okay, Dad?" Jake asked, his voice quivering slightly. I knelt down beside them, forcing a smile. "Of course, buddy. We're going to make everything right. Just trust me." Just then, the lights flickered overhead, and a low growl echoed from the shadows. Max bolted to the corner, barking furiously, his body tense. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. It was as if the house itself was reacting to our preparations. "Let's get this over with," I said, trying to sound brave. "Mrs. Hargrove, what do we need to do?" She glanced around the room, her expression grave. "We must focus together, channel our energies, and remain united. If we falter, the entity will exploit our fear and divide us." As we arranged the items in a circle, the air grew thick with unease. I could feel the presence lurking, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The children huddled close to Sarah, their eyes wide with fear, while I took my position next to Mrs. Hargrove. "Remember," she said, her voice steady, "stay strong and keep your focus." Just as we were about to begin the ritual, a deafening crash echoed from the hallway, sending shivers down my spine. The doors slammed shut, and the lights flickered again, plunging us into darkness. My heart raced as I realized that whatever was in the house was not going to let us go without a fight. The air in the living room felt thick and suffocating as I rushed toward the corner where I had last seen our children. "Lily, Jake," my voice echoed off the walls, tinged with panic. Sarah was beside me, her eyes wide with fear, and I could see the tremor in her hands as she clutched the edge of the coffee table. When we finally spotted them, huddled together, their faces pale as ghosts, a wave of relief washed over me. "There you are," I exclaimed, dropping to my knees. "What happened?" They were whispering, Jake stammered, his small body shaking. "The shadows, they were talking to us." Sarah knelt beside them, her expression softening. "It's okay, sweethearts. We're here now. Nothing is going to hurt you." I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, but she fought them back, trying to be strong for the kids. "We need to figure this out," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my chest. "We can't let this thing control us." "What do we do?" Sarah asked, looking at me with an intensity that told me she was ready to fight. Mrs. Hargrove mentioned that we needed to perform a counter-ritual. We need to confront this entity together. If it's been feeding off our fear, we can't give it that power anymore. With a shared nod, we formed a circle, our children nestled between us. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "Okay, let's focus. We need to remember the symbol we found and what it represents. It's our key to breaking this cycle." As we began to chant the words Mrs. Hargrove had given us, the lights flickered ominously, plunging us into an eerie twilight. "Stay close," I urged, feeling the electric tension in the air. Just then, Max, our loyal dog, darted toward the dark corner of the room, barking furiously. "Max, no!" I shouted, but he was already fixated on something unseen. The shadows coalesced, swirling ominously, and I felt a chill creep down my spine. "What's happening?" Sarah cried out, her voice rising in pitch. The room trembled as the entity started to manifest. A mass of darkness took form, twisting and writhing, its features indistinct but radiating an undeniable malevolence. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. "Stay together," I yelled, wrapping my arms around Sarah and the kids as the shadows danced around us. "Look," Lily pointed. "This symbol." I turned to where she was pointing, and my heart sank. The etching we had found in the basement glowed faintly, pulsing with an eerie light that seemed to fight against the encroaching darkness. "We need to focus on it," I shouted, desperation creeping into my voice. We resumed our chant, voices trembling but united. As we recited the words, the shadows began to convulse, the entity's form flickering like a candle in the wind. "Fight it," I cried, feeling a surge of strength from our connection. Suddenly, the dark figure lunged toward us, a scream echoing in the air. "No!" I shouted, thrusting my hand out toward the symbol, hoping it would amplify our power. The entity hesitated for a moment, as if recoiling from the light of the symbol. "It's working," Sarah shouted, her voice rising above the chaos. But then, as if sensing our hope, the entity roared, and the room erupted into chaos. Sometimes I wonder if it's real, or just my mind playing tricks. I read aloud, a sense of dread pooling in my stomach. "What do you think it means?" Lily asked wide-eyed. "I don't know," I replied, my voice betraying my unease. "But it doesn't sound good." As we sifted through the items, we uncovered more strange artifacts: a rusted locket, a cracked mirror, and a wooden box with a symbol etched into its surface. It looked familiar, like something I'd seen in the old newspaper clippings we discovered at the library. "Guys, look at this symbol," I said, holding it up. Sarah leaned closer, her brow furrowing. "That looks like the same one we saw in the article about the family that disappeared. This is not just some random house." "Maybe it's a sign," Jake suggested, his voice trembling slightly. "Like, maybe we shouldn't be here." Max, who had been sniffing around, suddenly stopped and let out a low growl, his body rigid. "What's wrong with him?" Sarah asked, concern etched in her features. "Maybe he senses something," I said, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. The atmosphere felt charged, as if the very walls were holding their breath. "I don't like this place," Lily said, her voice trembling. "Can we go back upstairs?" "Just a little longer," I reassured her, though my own resolve was wavering. I turned back to the diary, hoping to find something that would explain the ominous feeling settling over us. But as I flipped through the pages, I reached the end. All that was left were scribbled, frantic notes that trailed off into madness. "It knows my name. It won't let me leave. Guys, we should go," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Just then, a loud crash echoed from the corner of the room, making us all jump. I spun around, heart racing, to see Max barking furiously at an empty space. "What is it, boy?" I asked, but he wouldn't stop growling, his eyes fixed on something unseen. "Let's get out of here," Sarah urged, grabbing Lily's hand. We rushed out of the hidden room, and I felt a weight lift as we ascended the stairs. But the sense of relief was fleeting. The house felt different now, darker, almost alive, as if it were aware of our presence. "Why did we stay?" Jake asked, his voice shaking. "I thought I could handle it," I admitted, guilt washing over me. "But I think we need to talk about what we found. We're not alone in this house." As we reached the top of the stairs, the shadows seemed to stretch toward us, hungry and eager. I glanced back, half expecting to see something lurking in the darkness, but there was nothing, just the oppressive silence that enveloped us. "Let's keep each other close," Sarah said, her eyes wide with fear. I nodded, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on us. Whatever had happened here before, it was far from over. The air in our living room felt heavy as I paced back and forth, my mind racing with thoughts of the strange occurrences that had plagued our family since moving in. Max, our loyal dog, was unusually tense, his fur bristling as he stared intently at the corner of the room where shadows seemed to dance. Sarah was sitting on the couch, her face pale and drawn, and I could see the worry etched deep into the lines of her forehead. "Mark, I can't shake this feeling," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's like something is watching us. I stopped and turned to face her. I know, but we can't jump to conclusions. Maybe it's just the stress of moving, or the kids adapting to a new place. We need to stay calm. Even as I spoke, I could feel doubts creeping in. The newspaper clippings we'd found, the strange whispers at night. It was all too much. Just then, the doorbell rang, shattering the oppressive silence that had settled over us. I exchanged a glance with Sarah before heading to the door. When I opened it, an elderly woman stood there, her silver hair cascading down her shoulders. She wore a long, dark coat, and her eyes, bright but weary, seemed to pierce right through me. "Mrs. Hargrove?" I asked, recalling the occult specialist we had contacted the day before. "Yes, dear," she replied, her voice steady and reassuring. "I've come to help." I stepped aside to let her in, and as she entered, Max began barking fiercely, his growls echoing through the hallway. I tried to calm him, but he wouldn't stop, his eyes fixed on Mrs. Hargrove. "Not a fan of surprises, is he?" she said with a faint smile. "Animals tend to be more sensitive to these things." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, her expression turning serious. "This house is on cursed land, linked to an ancient ritual that went horribly wrong. It seems the entity has taken a particular interest in your family." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "What kind of entity?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "It's an ancient malevolent force, one that feeds on fear and despair. The symbol you found in the basement is a binding mark, a remnant of the failed ritual performed by the previous owners. They tried to contain it, but it only grew stronger." Sarah joined us, her eyes wide with apprehension. "What can we do to protect ourselves?" Mrs. Hargrove's expression softened. "You must perform a counter-ritual to cleanse the house. It won't be easy, and you must be prepared for the entity to fight back. It will do everything in its power to disrupt the ritual." The tension in the room intensified. I glanced at Sarah, who looked as frightened as I felt. "We have to do this. For the kids,"